Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Was on the road for a couple days. We are back, and what we are doing is taking a look at transfer portal classes as the transfer portal winds down and giving some grades out for what we think these teams did in the transfer portal. And we are starting with the USC Trojans. Now, before we get into it again, just want to say thank you to you guys and especially the USC fans. There's been a ton of news, probably one of the better off seasons we've seen for USC across the country. And the engagement and the support you guys have shown truly does mean a lot. So if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. This is one of the teams my brother and I are most high on heading into 2023. So we'll be talking a lot about it. So if you do enjoy it, subscribe to the channel. We appreciate you guys. Dill, I'm going to kick this one off to you. How I did this was I was kind of looking at two things. The quality of players that were brought in. You see a lot of teams bring in a ton of quantity. I focused a little bit more on the quality of players at the positions they needed to address, and that's why I have USC with an A+ grade. And I'm not going to give out A+ grades for everyone, but USC took a look at this team. They said, where do we need to get better? And they absolutely brought in very, very good players at those positions that they needed to address. For me, it's an A+. I'm interested to hear your take here.
Yeah, and I very much agree. Like USC did as good of a job as I think they could have in any realistic world. I mean, what they did is they brought in some size and physicality up front, and that's obviously what the problem was with USC is they didn't have enough depth in those positions in the front seven and at the linebacker spot, so they'd get worn down. You look at the two games they lost to Utah, gave up leads and later in the game. And they just got physical. I mean, Bear Alexander, big, 6'3", 225-pound player. Anthony Lucas, big, 6'7", 270 on the edge. I think they did what they needed to do, adding the size, adding the girth, and adding depth.
The girth. I love that. I said the same thing. Like the front seven was, I think, the position USC needed to address the most. You look at what USC struggled with last year. Their defense forced a lot of turnovers, which was good. That being said, towards the end of the year when the turnovers dried out, like there were teams that were able to run the football. And if you're looking at projecting USC in 2023, what's like the only way I can see USC losing football games is when teams can just run the football and keep the football out of Caleb Williams' hands. Because I don't see any teams beating USC in a shootout. And so the only way is kind of what Utah did, which was able to run the football, be a little bit more physical, and not let Caleb Williams have his impact on the football game. You take a look at what they did in the front seven. You listed it too, a couple guys, right? Bear Alexander, I think, was probably the most impactful guy in terms of you want to stop the run. You gave up 5.5 yards per carry to opposing running backs last year. Go get a guy who's 6'3", 325 pounds. Like, this dude's a monster, and he's going to be a guy that's going to let the linebackers be able to clean it up. Anthony Lucas, a guy that I've heard is doing phenomenal things in spring ball. Jack Sullivan, a guy that's at least going to add some depth. Like, teams wanted him out of the transfer portal. He's kind of a flex guy, 280 pounds, can play inside, can play outside. And then finally, a guy like Mason Cobb and Kion Barnes. Mason Cobb, there's not many linebackers that hit the portal that had over 100 tackles in the 2022 season. Mason Cobb was one of them. I think that's a massive get, more of a heavier linebacker that maybe can counteract Gentry, who's a little bit more lengthy and a little bit more athletic. What they did at the front seven, which was probably their biggest position of need, was massive. And Dill, the depth. You said it best. The depth is there. You look at Georgia's defensive line. Like the Jordan Davis, Devontae Wyatt were the starters in 2021. Jalen Carter wasn't even starting. But why was that defensive line so good? Because they had multiple units that they could roll in and multiple bodies that could be fresh all game.
And also the way USC plays on offense, you need to have depth because they score so quickly. They play so fast. And in these two, USC's on the field a lot. And guys just, I feel like their defensive linemen especially, they just didn't have two waves of guys to throw at teams. And now I think they're building that up. And you look, they brought in about four guys who, again, not all of them are going to be stars. Lucas and Bear are going to be stars, probably.
Sounds like it.
The other guys, maybe not. And that's okay. It's like not everyone is going to be that first team all Pac-12 player, but at least they're going to be serviceable players you can throw out there as Caleb Williams and that Lincoln Riley-led offense are running up and down the field.
They're going four plays, 80 yards, and a touchdown. You saw in the spring game. Like that is what this offense is. You need bodies on the defense because you're playing a lot of snaps. Caleb Williams is not taking very long on his offensive drives. Hey, USC did throw in a punter there. I don't know if he's going to see the field at all this year, but they did get a punter in the transfer portal as well. Shout out them. The next position that I think they needed, and it's like there you'll see the emphasis like on the defense side of the ball. Like that's where if USC wants to win a national title, they need to get that defense right. And it's the cornerback room. Like they gave up some explosive plays, 64% completion percentage to opposing quarterbacks. That's not a great number. You lose a guy like Mekhi Blackman to the draft. They go out and get two guys that I'm a big fan of. Christian Roland Wallace from Arizona, who is a phenomenal player in the Pac-12, and then Traquan Fagans, who, again, when you evaluate the transfer portal, you're doing a couple different things. You're taking a look at not only the quality of the player, but also the age. Like Fagans is a guy who's a 2022 kid, so he's only used up 1 year of eligibility. I believe he redshirted at Alabama. So he got 4 years of eligibility, essentially a high school kid coming into this team. And you have a lot of guys who are proven guys who might only have 1 year of eligibility in the portal. Then you have guys who are really young and talented who you can have the opportunity to develop a little bit. And I think Fagans is one of those guys. I think they got better in the secondary as well.
And that's just the thing. Obviously, all the most of the numbers in terms of what they were landing in the portal was coming on the defensive side.
Yeah.
And obviously that's what they needed. But I will say, like, to just jump over to the other side, they did add some high level skill. And I think Marshawn Lloyd's the one who leads it off for me in terms of his importance, just because they are losing
Travis Dye. I'm actually pissed that you brought up Marshawn Lloyd because he's been my guy, and I wanted to be the first one to bring him up.
He's not your guy.
He's my guy.
He was killing it at South Carolina last year.
I bet on Marshawn. And we talked about him when he came over. Like Marshawn Lloyd's a guy that South Carolina offensive line stunk. Like it was not good. And Marshawn Lloyd was playing hero ball for a lot of time. And again, former top 50 dude nationally coming out of high school, was kind of a prodigy, if you will. Then he tore his ACL, had a bad injury. This was really the first season you got to see him fully healthy. He looked phenomenal. And behind this USC offensive line, which was where we probably can go to next, they did a great job retooling that offensive line too after losing guys like Brett Nealon and Andrew Voorhees to the draft.
Yeah, and that's, again, that offensive line I thought was really good last year. That's certainly the problem they had. So they still have, I think, the bones of what they need up front. They add a couple of guys, and again, it's just they didn't add a ton of guys on offense, and they really didn't need to. But I like the additions. I like the additions they made. I think they filled the few holes that they needed to fill, and got better at those spots.
Yeah, you look at what they did. Emmanuel Pregnon, one of the most sought-after offensive line prospects in the transfer portal. You saw teams in the SEC offer him, in the Pac-12. USC is able to win that. Jared Kingston, a guy that was going to go to the NFL draft. Like he's an NFL draft prospect. And then you go get Michael Tarkin, who was a starter at the SEC level for the Florida Gators. That it's so weird because last year, and there's so much USC hate, and I'm just going to raise my hand real quick. Like, I was part of the haters 12 months ago. I was like, this USC team thinks you're going to play 7-on-7. You go and watch that team play last year. That was a good offensive line. Did they struggle in pass protection a little? Sure. But in terms of running the football, that was a physical and dominant group that was getting a lot of push and letting those running backs cook. You bring in a guy like Marshawn Lloyd. You bring in 3 guys who I think will be playing and starting for USC on the offensive line. Like, this is a good offensive line.
It's actually like, as much as you don't think of it when you think Lincoln Riley, this is like an offense I don't think defense are going to want to play against. You got 2 running backs in Austin Jones and Marshawn Lloyd now who are big, physical, powerful runners. Again, we just talked about they bulked that off. They reloaded that offensive line that was very good a year ago. And it's like, as much as Caleb Williams is going to do his thing and throw the ball, and he's going to be obviously the leader. It's like, no duh. But they're going to be like, bring that element of offensive football that, again, I just don't think teams in the Pac-12, like what Oregon State was able to do to teams in terms of that physicality and that the issues they presented some Pac-12 defenses. I think the USC has a little bit of that, and they like that just makes them such a scary offense, aside from the fact that Caleb Williams is like the best player I've ever seen.
Yeah, and then, I mean, you talk about Caleb Williams being the best player in college football. The wide receiving group is probably top 3, if not top 2. Probably the only team I'd comfortably beat them out is probably Ohio State in terms of the wide receiver room. They bring in Dorian Singer, like one of the best, if not the best wide receiver in the Pac-12 last year at Arizona, caught for over 1,000 yards. He comes to USC. Like, the rich get richer. You lose a guy like Jordan Addison, but bring back most of your guys. Off the top of my head here, like Mario Williams, Brandon Rice, Taj Washington. You have Zachariah Branch coming in, coming in. Deuce Robinson coming in to play tight end. Now you add in a 1,000-yard catcher and Dorian Singer, who's electric in space. Like, You can't give Caleb Williams a good run game and then all this offensive talent around him and expect this offense not to be one of the best we've seen in the last decade.
No, I mean, and of course, everyone knew they were going to be incredible. And then just like, I think what they did on the defense obviously was much more important. But
yes,
you just break this whole thing down. They just did what they needed to do. They filled their holes. They got a couple of young guys, as you mentioned, and as Lincoln Riley kind of builds that pipeline up of depth. The one other thing I wanted to get to just to close this out is, do you think the size of Lincoln Riley's portal additions are going to go down much?
I was going to ask you this. I do. I think Lincoln Riley was in a really interesting spot. He came into USC last year, and you remember how active he was in the transfer portal last year. A little bit more of an emphasis on quantity than quality. Like he was just like getting bodies in because the cupboards were there. This year, it's a little bit more of an emphasis on quality. Like these are mostly guys who are going to be starters. Like there's not a lot of guys who they were just taking a take. And then I think you project this team after they brought in a very good class in 2023. I think Lincoln Riley will be active in the transfer portal. He strikes me as a coach that will just be active in the transfer portal. USC is kind of a destination. As this program continues to win football games, it's going to be a program that attracts talent out of the transfer portal. I would be surprised if next year during this time we're talking about 15-plus transfers coming in. Just because once Lincoln Riley gets his recruiting classes in, he gets some of these younger transfer portal guys in, there's not going to be as much room. And we talked about this. Like a healthy program is not taking 20-plus transfers because that means you're not recruiting the high school level well and you're not developing well. And you have a lot of guys leaving. And so you don't see Georgia and Bama take 20-plus transfers. I don't think Lincoln Riley in this USC program will do that 3-4 years from now. That being said, I think they needed to the last 2 years because they needed to get some players in.
And I'd echo that. It's like you heard Lincoln Riley on Colin Cowherd's show. He's like, what the portal's done for me is it allows me at USC to expedite the build back of what everything's going on. So he's like, he did kind of make that implication. Like, yes, we're going to be really active for my first couple of years, but at the end of the day, and he stressed it in USC fans and their beat reporters and all that. And they always make the point, like, you need to just do an excellent job recruiting the state of California, especially the southern part. And that's at the end of the day, what if Lincoln Riley is going to make USC like USC of 2005, 2006, those Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart years when they were like the best team we've ever seen in college football, he's going to need to just own the state. Every kid from Mater Dei and those big St. John Bosco, those big schools from that area, they're all going to need to be going to USC, or at least a good portion of them. And again, once Lincoln Riley, like if he really starts winning again at that school like program and putting guys in the NFL, and Caleb Williams is going to go number 1, and Mario Williams is going to no doubt be a draft pick, I think he'll be able to attract those top tier kids from that California area, especially the Southern California area. And then I just don't see him using the portal to.
Yeah, and I kind of saw. I'll give the analogy again, and I butchered it last time, and then we will close it out here. Like you use the transfer portal as like a dietary supplement. It's not going to be your whole diet. If you were like thinking about your diet, I think I'm nailing it a little bit more than I did last time, though. But you're not just going to drink all protein shakes like like for your diet. You use it as, hey, we need a little bit more nutrition in this area. You use the transfer portal to do that. But if you want to build a program, I think it's still done at the high school level and then getting those guys in and developing. They have one of the best strength coaches in the whole entire country in Beanie Wiley. And so I do think it's going to be a little bit smaller, but USC absolutely crushes it. They address the positions in need with quality players and some young guys sprinkled in. Phenomenal job by Lincoln Riley and USC. And again, one of the teams that we are the most high on heading into 2023. Appreciate you guys checking us out again. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with the fellas, especially the Trojan fans. And we'll talk to y'all later.